Most podcasts talk to founders after the story is already written. When the latest raise is announced, the product has shipped, and the narrative is clean.
We wanted to find out why they decided to take the founder leap in the first place, what idea captured their imagination, and how they handle the pressure to build. Welcome to First Commit. I'm Laura Hamilton.
I'm Eliya Elon, and we're investors at Notable Capital. We spend a lot of time with technical founders who are on the cutting edge. If you're thinking about what it's like to start a company in the AI era, this one's for you.
This is First Commit. Let's get into it.
Good morning. Today I have Dor Fledel with me, which is a longtime friend. We'll get into that soon. But a bit about Dor. Dor is a former founder. He was the founder of Spera, which was acquired by Okta Security. I think it was just shy of a year and a half into the venture, which is insane. Rumors say Okta paid about $100 million for the business. Congrats.
Thank you.
Dor is also an amazing tennis player. We've played a lot as kids. But also he's an alumni of a prestigious Israeli program called Talpiot. So before we get into a few things, maybe I'll hand it over to you. I think a lot of folks who are listening aren't that familiar with the program.
Yeah, for sure. So Talpiot, I think the most simplistic way is like the Israeli nerds West Point. That's how we view it, is like 50 people a year that are recruited to be technical leadership in the Israeli military, pretty dispersed. And then when you join, you're actually enlisting for 9 years when you're 18, which is a good commitment, but worth the impact, in my opinion. And what I personally had there was think about a group of very like ambitious, talented people who are putting everything they have into making the best version of themselves through a lot of training, academic, technical, military training. And it was pretty humbling and exciting to be part of this exciting group that really pushed everyone to the limits. And I think that really engraved in me personally, like strive for perfection, excellence. There are a lot of pretty notable alumni, for example, in the cybersecurity industry, like the Wiz founders, the Checkpoint founders, so on and so forth. And this network is very close and helpful. So one text away from everyone there.
That's amazing. So obviously your life didn't start at 18 in the program. Well, we actually met a few years before that. We were in high school. We met on a tennis court.
Yeah, I think even middle school. Yeah,
even
I think it's like 14, okay. 15. Yeah.
Well, you're a bit older than me then. Yeah, I think something like that. Before we started recording, we were talking about who was a better tennis player. And I think we agreed it was about the same level, and then you retired.
Yeah.
So I'll leave it with that. So you joined Talpiot at 18. Obviously, you became a successful founder after that. I would love to hear from you a bit. When was that moment that you realized that entrepreneurship is for you? Was it a moment? What is it, like a build-up?
For me, it was a pretty long and gradual build-up. Mostly the like self-realization of it was because people around me told me they were sure I'm going to do it from day one. But I always thought it's something that I would really like to do. The thing that I was really passionate about is the impact and working with very good people. And for me, I think during the military, in a very unique way, I think the Israeli military is a combination of a corporate where there are processes and there are like harness and you can do whatever you want, and a total like chaos and a great place for innovation and you do you, and a lot of like open minds, especially in the areas where I've been, which is the intelligence 8200, if people know it. So for me, like I was always in this boundary of being the like innovative person, innovative projects. A lot of the biggest things I pride, and I served for 11 years, the biggest things that I pride myself are like the 0 to 1s that made the impossible possible, obviously with a great group of people that I was part of. And that really pulled me. Later on, I had, and I think it's very interesting to see how the community evolves. I had my bosses in the military who left, who founded startups. I saw it. It wasn't that impossible story anymore. People around me from my Talpiot class, about a half of our class are actually founders of companies at this point, 6 years after our term finished. And for me, it was a gradual thing of like, when is the right time to do it? What experiences? I play to win. That's tennis 101. I think it's a great sport, very individualist, but also very mental. I love tennis. We can talk about tennis all day.
Yeah, there is something in tennis though, right? Because unlike in group sports, it's very clear that it's up to you. There's no one to blame. If you lose, it has to be something about you. If you win, it has to be something about you. There's no one else to look at.
Yeah, and I think that if you like, a lot of my friends growing up were doing professional swimming. I think that swimming, it's not like a competition against a rival in the same sense that tennis is. Like if you're going to run 100 meters in 8 seconds, it's not going to matter how fast the competition is. But with tennis, it's really much about like, how do you interact with your opponent? Where do you go?
Yeah.
So on and so forth. So I think growing up, I really saw like, when is the right moment for me to play to win. And I came here to the US, did my grad school MBA. I've seen some other opportunities that I had. And then I thought that there would not be a better timing, both from how the market looks and a very strong passion I personally had for cybersecurity and identity. I had a very strong passion about how my personal life looked and how much I can be all in, wake up at 5 a.m., just do it. And also the connections in Israel. I think that for me personally, a big part of it was working with great teams in Israel. Being far really wears down the relationships to some degree. And I felt like now is like the perfect timing to do it. And things really evolved very well with a co-founder that I worked in the past with and have very high appreciation to. Since we founded a startup, I even have more appreciation to. And that really worked well.
Our listeners know, and the purpose of this format is really not to talk about the company, but we have to. It is just one line so people have a bit of grounding. So maybe just summarize for us, what did Spera, your company, do? And you mentioned your co-founder. You guys were working beforehand in the military?
Yeah, we worked very closely for around 5 years. Ariel, my co-founder, and myself. I was his commander. Later, we were peers, and we had very like some of the best moments of my military service were with him, as well as the rest of the professional career. And just as an intro about the company, and not to go too detailed, but identity is the number one attack surface. I think that kind of like materialized somewhere in 2021 to 2023. That was where the time that we all understood there were pretty notable breaches, Snowflake, Twilio, and additional. And the main thing that we did was really empower security teams to understand what are the biggest gaps and risks in identity and really go ahead and resolve them in a timely fashion, very easy, and give them the full context they need to actually fulfill it, which might sound obvious to people outside of cybersecurity, but actually in cybersecurity, it's a pretty big technical problem that required a pretty material graph technology that correlates a lot of information and actually allows them to do it.
And again, without going too deep, notoriously identity is kind of a complicated space because it's split between different corporate stakeholders. You have information technology, you have security. They look at it from different places. You guys kind of played right into that space, which also leads to the acquisition of Okta, which is traditionally more of an IT vendor, not necessarily seen as a security vendor.
One of the most interesting things that customer told us early on that made me even have more conviction about the problem is that we're actually solving also an organizational problem, and how identity teams evolved in the organization over time, how we're shifting from on-prem legacy to the cloud, and how that meets our organizations and enterprises are actually built. So for me, it gave me even better like stamped into we have something. Technology can help solve stuff, which was very exciting. And for me, and we can talk about post-acquisition life all along, but I had a very material time in Okta. I felt very impactful. I felt like we're like on the track there. And one of the founders I really appreciate is a third-time founder that gave me some of the best tips. He said that actually the company starts after you get acquired and not before. And I think that we learned, and we were in a very interesting point in Okta, that Okta transitioned from an IT buyer to a security buyer, and we were part of that transition, which made our time there and the impact of the product even much more interesting.
I love that. Later, you'll tell me who that is. But I think if you're a mission-driven founder, that is very much true, because many times once you get acquired, putting aside kind of like folks who build, go public, build massive go-to-market machines. The acquisition, you can choose how to look at it, but if you decide to look at it as an amplifier, as a leverage, it's really where the story begins, right? You've started, in your case, you guys, about a year and a half into the company, created amazing technology, sold it to Okta. That's when you start really getting distribution and getting access and being able to drive the value you guys were working on.
We had a very good combination of a team that's very mission driven. And also, I think the fact that it was pretty early also helped us. That it actually, I think, more so looked that we went from a seed round to an F round. Like in a day that you suddenly have like thousands of sellers who just want to sell what you have, and a lot of customers who are really excited about the value proposition. And Okta has been very diligent with customers before they acquired us to see the fit. So for us, I think like people were working hard towards the mission, and it's one of the things I'm proud the most at, because I think that there are many reasons to found a company and many reasons to get acquired. But I think all in all, a very successful acquisition is something that when I look at myself in the mirror, that's something that I feel like that's part of building a business. In my eyes, obviously, the people who went and IPO'd, congrats to them. But I think the more probabilistic round is towards an acquisition, and actually fulfilling the promise is something that really meant a lot to me as part of Play to Win.
Okay, we talked a bit about post-acquisition and living up to the mission, but maybe let's go back a few years. You are at Chicago at the time, if I remember correctly, and you probably had so many other opportunities, right? You were graduating from your MBA. Why start this company? Why start in this space?
Remind me, you went to Northwestern as well, right?
Yeah, I had a weird Northwestern experience.
Yeah. So I think the biggest two things that I took from my time at Chicago and meeting a lot of very diverse set of people like who don't have as technical experiences as I have was two main things. One, my passion to building. I've done, and you and I discussed it over drinks, but I think the span of how much are you a builder versus how much are you an advisor, an investor, so on and so forth. And I have a lot of appreciation towards those roles. I was personally pulled more towards the builder, the direct impact, those kinds of things. And I think the time in Chicago and trying other things, meeting other people really enforced to me how much I like to see what I'm doing go through their fruition. And that means a lot to me. And the second thing that really struck me in Chicago was how much specific environment that I came from is unique in technical innovation. I think that there are a lot of great people in the world. A lot of people are doing I would never find the right people to do algo trading with in out of my network. But I think I was lucky and fortunate to be part of the 0.0001% of the people who can do a 0 to 1 in cybersecurity. And that really meant a lot to me, because what it actually means is, in my very, let's call it selfish way, is that it makes my life very interesting. Why? Because I can now sit in a table with the head of the security programs of the top enterprises in the world, to look them in the eye and to tell them something very meaningful. And I think that in any different domain, and I had some thoughts about other domains, I wouldn't be as much in the race to the top as I were in cybersecurity, thanks to my unique baggage, and also thanks to the people that I worked with that really motivated me.
So it's not just play to win, it's play on a board. The pieces are organized to you in your favor.
Yeah. And also playing in the Premier League.
Wow, interesting. That's a big discussion. I don't know if maybe we'll come back to it. Okay, so maybe let's go a few years back. I'll give some context because this is a different one. We grew up in the same town or neighborhood, I don't know, whatever, in Israeli terms, however you call it. But we also kind of look very similar, especially from certain angles and from afar. But so, funny story, last week was RSA conference and you didn't go.
Yeah, it was my first RSA
your first
on
RSA
the bench.
Off. But I did go, and about 2 or 3 times people reached out to me and said so good to see you. It's been so long. What are you up to these days? And I'm like, who are you? And they look me in the eye like, oh my God, you're not Dor. This has been with us for for a few years now. I think it's important to get it out there that we're, as far as we know, we're not related.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know if you actually know it, but my high school girlfriend, so she was in the same school
Who's
as
your
you.
wife?
No, another one. Another one.
Okay.
Yeah. She was in high school with you, and she actually one day told me and kind of like confessed that she went and she saw you. She thought you were me. She didn't understand what am I doing in high school. And she actually came and hugged you from behind, only then to realize that you're not me. Do you remember it, by the way?
God, I really don't remember that.
Yeah.
That's,
So for her, it was a bit of a trauma. So
I hope not that big of a trauma.
No.
But
Yeah. And she hopefully made
she recovered. Okay. Interesting. Good one. So, we talked about Spera, we talked about Okta. It wasn't clear, but you decided to finish your time at Okta recently, and we're not going to go too deep into it, but you're starting something new, very exciting. I'm sure some VCs are listening. So when I say new, I don't mean a new company. So we don't need your phone all ringing, but we won't go too deep into it. But I'd say at a high level, you're joining one of the frontier labs to do some really interesting work in the intersection of AI and security.
I always like to be in the eye of the storm. So the eye of the storm kind of moved in the last few years somewhere else. And that's where I'm heading. Yeah.
Very cool. Again, not to get into the what, but in this podcast, we really like to get into the decisions behind these things. Obviously, you had amazing success as a founder. I even asked you a few times, hey, do you want to do another startup? Why choose that? Take us into that headspace of making that big decision.
The decision not to found something new and to join something existing, I think, relied on a lot of impact-driven decision and also curiosity. I think that for impact, I felt like now we're in a very unique point in time where some companies, like we're seeing the emergence of the next Microsofts, the next Googles, and 30 years ago, I looked at what were the top tech companies like 30 years ago. It was like, wouldn't name anyone, but it's not the usual suspects that we have today, not companies that people typically strive to work at today. And I think that AI is now really allowing the next wave of that. And I would love to be very material in formulating how those companies safely allow customers to adopt it. And that's number one. Number two, I think really how we work is changing. I'm a pretty skeptical person. I'm also a very big optimist, but also skeptical. And I was skeptical until I played with it around a year ago. And I think that while enterprise adoption is always lagging around after the individual consumer, so on and so forth, this is really revolutionary. And I think the jobs and how people just work, especially in tech environments, is going to materially change. I see now that tech is the first adopter of those things, which makes sense. And me being part of it, I really wanted to see how the future looks like to be really part of that. And I think joining one of those labs is really a way to really experience it firsthand, as well as I found one that I really resonate with their mission, how they view things. Great team.
Amazing. Maybe in the future we'll have you back and we'll talk a bit about more clearly. But you and I talk a lot about early stage startups, different teams, what separates them. And I think you have one of the best mental models for how to come up with idea, how to force a discovery. We talk a lot about friction. Maybe share with us a bit about how you think about that.
And for context, I work with multiple teams. Great to see somehow, I felt I got a good network that really made very good discussions appear around me. And I was able to not only learn from my experience, but also from others' experience, which was really, really insightful. And I think when we talk about friction, I view two things. One is friction is good, actually. That's counterintuitive, but friction is good, and we'll go into that. And the second is I really learned to look at things from a risk-reward curve as a general concept, maybe trivial, but general concept. So let's break it to two main things. One is your interactions with customers and, for example, VCs, but let's focus on customers.
So just to level set, we're talking to a theoretical founder, and this guidance is towards, hey, how to think about the interaction with your potential customers.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. I think what really helped me And that's the balance and the art of being in every job, but specifically being a founder, is how founders balance the risk reward curve and they balance the friction. So just to give an example, I think that specifically as a founder, when you're in an ideation phase, you should apply as much friction as possible, because in the risk reward curve, you really prefer to catch those things very early on. Otherwise, you were stuck with the company for a lot of years, and you might have scored a few sales, but sort of that's it. And what are examples to friction? Examples to friction are, one, in questions you ask. Second is in the process, as an example. So let's focus on questions you ask. A question that I really liked asking that gave me a lot of context was, hey, Eliya, if I weren't coming to you now and talking to you about identity security, would you have thought about it? Like, what are the actions that you've actually taken in this realm and in this domain prior to me coming here at 8 a.m. This morning? And that gave me a lot of insights to how they think about things. And the worst answer you can get, in my opinion, is I wasn't doing anything about it. Like, I wasn't doing anything about it means I hopped on a call, maybe I'm nice, maybe I have a curiosity, maybe 10 other things, maybe I owe a VC some favor, whatever. And if they were not doing anything, if their organizations are not already built around it, if there is nothing that you can actually replace, that means, in my mental model, that you're probably not so high in the priority list of what they actually have.
And I want to highlight why this is friction, because I agree with you. And I think many founders, the biggest inherent fear they have is they don't want to have their idea being irrelevant or called ugly.
Or they want to sell. Like, if you're on a high note, someone gets like really excited about what you do. Why should you add friction?
So there's a good reason why you should add friction.
Yeah. It's just very counterintuitive. And the other type of friction that I leveraged was actually a process friction. Like, people talk about, like, okay, let's sign an NDA. NDA is something that typically a stakeholder cannot sign on their own. They need to go to legal. They need to take an action.
They need to involve other parties within the organization.
Exactly. So there is a certain tax that they have to pay and a certain commitment fee. Let's call it like that. And what I personally learned and how I saw good success is to really balance the amount of friction that you put in the process. So as an example, the first 3 customers that we've had, we just needed, as a startup, we needed real data, a real environment, something to play that's not like a 3-people startup that just spun out in Okta and AWS environment. So actually, for the first customers, my risk reward was, I don't mind if they are not even like being closed as customers, they're like throwaway, all good, 0 friction in that phase after the ideation. After we had the data, then gradually we introduced more friction to the process. So we started with sign any legal document as a barrier for entry. If they cannot sign the document, they're not going to buy anything. It's fine. After that, we introduced the friction of actually not making much more of a sales cycle. They have a POC success criteria that is formulated, and they need to sign it off in a meeting, for example, which is a typical enterprise sales play. And the more you go forward, the more friction you add to actually assure, and I saw it as an experiment for product market fit. But the last thing that I actually saw in Okta, which was really exciting to see, is the last step where there is a sales, that's in my mind like highest level of friction, where there is a salesperson who was not even trained by me as a founder, who was trained by another person, and then they go through a sales process with the customer who is not even going to meet me and have like my point of view, and then like going to buy
compounding friction.
Correct.
There's so many layers of friction.
So many layers, and that is actually what gives you more assurance about the validity of the problem, the validity of the solution. For example, talking about pricing very early on adds friction. I think it's a great way because it moves the discussion. As a founder, in general, you want to solve expensive problems. Why? Because it's a proxy, and it's not the best proxy, but a good proxy to how valid the problem is, how material it is. So talking about the pricing, the way I actually did it was really honest and transparent. Talking to customers, I asked them, like, I want to make sure that that the company that I'm now committing my life and soul into is really solving a top problem. how would you price it? How would you have done it? And that gave me a lot of insights, both on good things that we built and also ideas that we had that we didn't go for.
That's a great question, actually. Putting it like a very vulnerable question. You're talking to very early design partners, like, hey, I'm going to commit my life to this. I want to make sure I'm committing it to the right direction. We talked about friction in the context of customers, but I think, and from our conversations, it also applies to other aspects. Your co-founder, the VCs you partner with. Why do you think friction has this quality that the more you add of it in the discovery phase and really when you're trying to figure something out, to your point later on with Okta was figuring out the sales process at scale. Why do you think it's so powerful yet so hard for most people to run at with excitement?
I'll maybe share more from my personal relationship with my wife. It took us like something like 10 years to talk about kids and do we want kids and all those things. I think we were just not used to being so upfront about some things. And I think a lot of the founders that I work with are really problem solvers in heart and mediators also as people. And being a mediator often says that you're going to take the load and it's going to be fine and you're going to figure it out later. I think that specifically, when we're talking about founding companies, and I've seen also recently stories where the team is actually not successful in bridging the gaps and some of the founders leave and that has material impact on the company. In my opinion, talking about the highest points of friction very early on with the co-founder is very material, because in a typical process, from what I've seen, within a few months, you kind of like get married. And I think that it's very different from our personal relationships, how we build them, so on and so forth. And from there, things are going to be very high stakes, very high emotional load. And in my case, we're actually like an ocean apart, 10 time zones away, which causes everything to be even more complicated. And I think that really adding that friction early on, and I'll give examples in a second, is material to actually, again, on the risk reward, the biggest risk you can have, in my opinion, is not having the right co-founder. And really the reward of applying the friction early on is really material. I'll give an example. I think that actually hashing, for example, I've seen founders where they have multiple ideas. And now there is a question of how do you actually go about and choose which idea are you going to pursue? That is actually a wonderful test case of how things are going to operate in high ambiguity set in the future. It's not like giving equity to employees is any different. There are a lot of subjective opinions, a lot of ways to do it, and a lot of reasons why I'm wrong and you're right. I heard founders say sometimes that having like 3 founders is a great path because you actually have a tiebreak. There's no but
what a fundamentally flawed reason to
exactly
have
I think that it's like, my wife and I were 2, like, and we need to figure things out somehow. And I think that applying all the, like, if you finish the conversation and you thought that your co-founder was not doing the right things, so on and so forth, engaging with the feedback very early is important. I think that really arguing about the business direction is very important. Like, we had a lot of very good discussions about it, that really your ability to provide an opinion and to reconcile problems early on is something that I personally feel like is material for the success of the business, especially as things escalate.
This is tricky because we both grew up in Israel and we both moved to the US roughly the same time. And, I've grown to appreciate the cultural differences. I think now I understand that as Israelis, it's slightly easier for us to enjoy the high friction. It could be our military experiences, it could be many, many things, but I see Israeli founding teams more often run into the friction. Some people describe Israelis as looking at it from the outside as they're thinking about an idea as like, oh, these guys are fighting. And then you're just asking like, no, we're just thinking about something. I think that's the way we do it. I want us to rethink a bit about friction in other places. Do you think there is a framework you can recommend to founders to apply this early on in a way that will help be on the right place on the risk-reward curve, as you put it?
Yeah, I think that in general, I try to use two main questions, two simple questions. One is, what is my risk reward curve here in this specific situation? And the second is adding friction good for me or bad for what I'm trying to accomplish? And I think since you're building a company, for the implications of that. And just to give an example, we wanted to recruit an employee and they said that they actually want to travel for 3 months a year. And I think that maybe some companies have that's okay. I think that just from the culture that we wanted to build in our startup, we believe in agency, ownership, and a person that just goes away, including the implications of a person that goes away and people looking at it and seeing and the role and the role model you're setting in the company in the first 15 employees is something that we thought is not productive. So actually in that risk reward curve, and we decided to apply friction and say, we're actually not supporting that. We don't mind you take time off. If you have your passions, it's great to pursue them. It's not like a 24/7 job, but we don't want you to work here and to not be here 3 months a year, especially in your first year. In our first year, that's just not it. And eventually the person didn't come, went to a different place, did that. And I think that all good, kudos to the person who hired him. All good. It's just not really my style and how I wanted to do. And in my judgment, not where I wanted to be in the risk reward curve with the impact on the company culture. Yeah.
And you mentioned two questions. We'll get into the second one soon. But you know me, I try to look at things as many times from the psychological angle. I always wonder, this all makes total sense if you think about it from a rational perspective, yet so many people get it wrong. They decide to please in the moment. They don't want to get rejected. Did you feel those things?
Yeah. I think that for me, something that touched me was recruiting processes. I think more than other things. Many times, I think early on, the person is actually not saying no to your mission. You might think that they're saying no to you as a person. And I think that especially, and I think what made me even more like less balanced, let's call it like that, was competitive recruiting cycles where you have like another company in the picture and some of them like tend to be in somewhat relevant space. So that's even more material. So for me, I think, it's always a balance, and we're also emotional people and that works. A lot of why I do what I do is emotions. And I think that there's also a balance about that. Like if you're too much of a stickler to something, then you'll end up with the wrong team for other reasons. So I think it's always a balance, and in hindsight, easy to see why things happen, but there is no like alternative universe where you actually know what would have happened.
Yeah. It's funny. I think I shared this with you one time. Probably the advice I give most often to early founders, so like pre-ID, still thinking who's the right team, is just go semi off grid, get a place, and wherever you are in the world, I don't know, Greece or whatever, be there for 2-3 weeks. If you're partnered, bring your partners. If you can't survive in that environment for 2-3 weeks with all the human nuances of who takes the trash out, who cleans the sink, who makes dinner that night. Yeah, there's just I don't know. I'm quite opinion about this.
I love it. Yeah. And I think that, one of the things about partners as an example, and I'm just giving one example. I'm sure people who are hearing this have their own equivalent of this. But for example, in Israel, specifically in enterprise sales, a lot of the market is in the US, and it's very typical, like you and I moved here, that one of the founders, typically the CEO, or most normally the CEO, moves here within 6 to 24 months of founding the company. And some people take it as like, it's easy, I'll move. And for others, like, they might have reasons. And what I actually found in a non-negligible way is that partners of the founders might have a problem. As an example, some fields are really localized, like lawyers or whatnot. And you're actually taking a person to a mission that you might have wanted to do since you were young, but that person didn't. And they might be up for it. They might be not. They might have their context of their family or whatnot that's not into it. And I think that this question is actually something that a lot of founders kind of like minimize in their context is how are my support circles, how is the environment that I'm part of is actually going to go through this. And that actually, in my opinion, impacts, like I just spoke with the team last week, and they want to decide who is going to be the CEO. And first of all, I'm happy they're talking about it very upfront because it's a very emotional piece that like about conflict management. And the second piece is really, they're actually, I really like that they're thinking about it right. Like whose family will be up to move within 6 to 24 months to the US, no questions asked, with all the friction, all the problems that come with it as part of the decision-making process. And I view it as a very like great framework. And I think that like the pressure, like as a founder, if your partner is not unhappy with the world, I personally have been out Monday through Friday. Usually I wasn't the best version of myself even at home. So doing that as early as possible and getting up to speed with that is, in my opinion, is a great idea.
And it's, expanding this framework of yours, it touches on another layer of friction, the intentionally driving friction within your personal life. Because I feel comfortable pushing it out. I think it's quite a naive thought to think that starting a company will be a separated endeavor and, I'm a founder, I'm all into that. And yeah, my personal life doesn't get in the mix of it. I've told this to my co-founders. I think I call my wife co-founder 0. And it's before even starting the company is like, hey, do you understand the implications? This can be 2 years, it can be 10 years. There will be many, many sacrifices. And I love the way you put it. It's adding more friction. And if you can't take even that extra bit of friction by just having that conversation, what are the chances it's not going to explode in your face in 3 years from now?
I think it also revolves a lot around a style. That's what I learned to appreciate, that my style is like all in, leave nothing on the table. I had friends who are founders who developed hobbies and had some leisure time and were able to go skiing every year for a week and whatever. And it's just not my style as a person.
I mean, your customers are your hobbies.
Yeah.
Whatever your customers' hobbies are, is that that's what we're doing.
Yeah. And I enjoy it. Like that's how I live my life. I have friends who've done it differently. And I actually personally learned that I would never found a startup with such a person. And not in a good or bad way. Just like if I like the people around me, even if for like how it appears and optics, look all in. Like that's the culture I want to build. That was material to me. And I think that I don't know how it helps, and I have no good solution at this point. But I found that even when founders are talking and engaging about it with themselves, with their partners, with their families, there is a pretty big gap between talking and walking the walk and the implications. I think that a lot of, like, I've seen some relationships break, and some of them had this discussion. I think that actually seeing it was different. And maybe to our discussion about friction, I personally feel like having your relationship, it's not bad as is. Maybe it's a good forcing function, but even adding that to the ideation piece and for example, not shying away from the conflicts in your relationship as you were doing the ideation might lead you to really understand how things would look and then make a decision on how you go forward.
Yeah. And look, we're talking about this for a while, but I think it's an important topic. Again, this is heavily influenced by culture, but I just don't understand the reason not to double click on these things. If you're working with your potential co-founders, if you can't open up on things that are vulnerable, to your point, the relationship, the moving part, all these things that there's no way it's not going to come up in the process of starting the business and in growing the business. That for me is actually the biggest tale about a potential co-founder, because it indicates somewhat of an avoidance from hard things. Not to over classify people, but it feels like there's just two types of people who try to like keep it flowing, and those who are like, no, what are the hardest things we can discuss today? Put them on the table. It's disgusting, it's ugly, but let's do that.
For sure. And I think that there is, like, in the last 20 or 30 years, maybe unlike our parents' generation, we're intertwining our work and personal life more and more. And if I were making investments, I would take that approach. Yeah.
Let's shift gears a bit. You're a big framework guy. You have these unique it's amazing. You have these unique learnings and this capability to summarize them in a way that is transferable to other people, which I think is unique. I definitely enjoy it. We talk a lot about engagement with customers. We talked about it from the perspective of friction. I think another aspect you and I discussed is understanding where are you fitting into the conversation. So you're talking to these customers, whether it's for sales or for validation, but obviously you're just one meeting in their day, in their week. Maybe expand on that a bit.
I think that, one of my biggest learnings in the process was where am I fitting in the customer's world and kind of like putting myself in their shoes, even from a context perspective. So I'll give you some of our background, but identity really, as I said, became a very, very hot thing back when we started the company, before and after. And I, as a founder, for a while, thought like, I have this great idea, I'm stepping into it. I'm now meeting a customer. I'm giving them my view of the world and how do we help them solve a problem. I think what really improved how we do things and improved how fertile were the conversations was when we realized how we need to fit in their context from what they've heard. So as an example, an average customer who's like more like mid startups, so on and so forth, would have met prior to meeting me 10 other identity startups. And in identity, for good or bad, everything goes back to the same buzzwords: least privilege, zero standing permissions, being proactive about enforcement, so on and so forth. And I think once we shifted the context to identity is important, at a certain point, we didn't even have a slide about it. Like, they're convinced, they heard it 10 times. And they weren't in the meeting if they weren't thinking identity is important. And then on the landscape of identity, we do that and not this, is really what made customers click within seconds instead of minutes and even never. And I learned how, like, a good salesperson once told me that you get the highest attention in the first 5 minutes of a conversation. And from there, like, have no buildups. Like, buildups are counterproductive for you. And it really helped me position both on where are we in the universe of vendors, because customers, what I learned, if they're really excited, they actually need to move it forward somehow. They need to have a very clear action item. Usually, if you're meeting leadership, it means forwarding it to one of their employees or someone like that. And really, specifically in identity, 2 different sections of startup innovation meant 2 different people. And once we help them understand who in their org is actually liable, and I've never told them who in your org is liable for that, but really helping them crystallize our value proposition, what we do, how are we different, we help them push it forward, because it was the unique, their context and how they came to the conversation was much more rich than I personally expected coming to the meetings.
In simple terms, it's meet people where they are.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, this is very dynamic, fast moving. Discovery conversations quickly shift into early sales conversations. Maybe expand a bit on, by understanding their context, you made it easier for them to move forward.
I think at a certain point, we even moved to, like, and I experimented with this, to telling them a very strong one-line sentence that really shows them what exactly do we do. So as an example, we help you detect out-of-band admins that have no MFA, and then automatically remediate them without impacting their day-to-day processes. That's something that really, in my area, in my domain, customers really understand. Like, it's a very clear problem statement, and it helps them position it that we're not replacing the Okta. Sometimes I even said, we're not replacing your IDP. We're on top, we're additive, and trying to give them as much as, like, how do we fit either the universe of vendors they have, which is something that I sometimes did. The other is feed the processes. Like, you today look for it manually in spreadsheets and do it like in a certain way. And if you've done the validation, if you have the conviction, you actually know that they're doing it and helping them really understand it. By the way, those who are not doing it is a very strong signal as well. Either they're not a good buyers or you don't have a market, but it's a strong signal either way.
Yeah, as we talk about it, I see also how these two points that you emphasize, they really can be combined, right? You're in this conversation, you're adding friction, but also if you understand the world of your customer or whoever you're talking to, it could be also a VC, it could be an employee you're hiring, you can't really drive to a fruitful next step, to your point.
Yeah. Yeah.
In the context of friction, we applied it to the big stakeholders in the founder's life, which is obviously your co-founders, your customers, your employees, the venture ecosystem. Do you think that also applies to the context aspect?
As an example, I sometimes work with founders, and I knew it only in hindsight, but the VC that we went and pitched our idea, they actually met 7 other identity teams in the last 2 months, and they didn't feel like they have the right angle. They didn't feel like they have the right team. They didn't feel whatever. And only when we got in, we actually learned that there was a memo that someone internally written about how would the next identity investment that we make look, and that we just fit that memo in a surprising way. I also learned it in Okta. Turns out companies don't actually go and buy companies out of thin air. There was a person, and in a corporate setting, sometimes it's done like a year in advance when you approve budgets. And someone wrote a memo, and they wrote a memo about how Okta should get into posture management, which is what we've done. And that triggered a process of corporate development going and seeking those companies, so on and so forth. So I think in many ways, now when I talk to founders, and I speak to quite a bit of founders, and sometimes I hear the same idea. I'm talking, for example, to you, and you are like the third company in the last 3 months where it was now talking about just tossing an idea, agent, security, and then
the third since 8 a.m. maybe.
Yeah. So I think the very interesting piece that good founders get is that they don't need to tell the VCs why. If you're not the first and not the second, you don't need to tell them why AI is a thing, why endpoint is material. You actually need to tell them why you're different than the 10 other companies that pitch them, why coming later in the process, because they already heard 10, some of them might be a year in. Why coming later in the process doesn't put you in a disadvantage and you're going to just lose because they had the first mover advantage, so on and so forth. So I think that context really helps position founders in the way that suits, in this case, the VCs in the best way.
If you're okay with it, I actually want to expand on this a bit. I think people really underestimate the power of just asking, and this can be a founder asking a VC, this can be an employee asking a potential employer. And obviously, I think it should be done more between founders selling early stage to customers. It's just asking, hey, what's your thesis about this space? Because maybe they don't have one. And then you understand you're in education mode. And maybe they do. And again, it goes back to that vulnerability and friction. Maybe their thesis is just fundamentally different than how you view the world. And then either you need to update your prior or you're just not a good fit.
I totally agree. One of the best sales, but it's even a conversation. It really affects how I operate, just because I think it's a lot about listening and active listening. Is someone I really value told me and taught me that in the beginning of meetings, I very often ask the person in front of me, what will be a good use of our time? And you actually learn a lot by somewhat open-ended questions like that. A bad example is a customer that told me, I actually just meet startups to stay up to date with the industry. And then it means that, okay, we're now in you give me your advice. And
maybe it's not in the ultimate optimization of theoretical time. Maybe it's not the best hours spent, but given that we're in this time, it's a great thing to know.
Yeah. And then I went to the biggest risk reward point that I could have taken, because now it's actually ideating together about things that we potentially think about doing in the future. And this guy was a great guinea pig for some of the messaging. that we've had. And I actually openly asked him, like, do you prefer me to say this or that? And he responded. So I think really asking those questions about the context is material. I think Gong published a very material article, I don't know if you know it, but about how the best salespeople actually operate as they analyzed and they have a lot of data. And they actually saw that the best sellers, and I think that selling is, everyone sells to some degree, actually only talk for 30% of the conversation. And I think that really, like, maybe the worst pitches I've seen is someone telling someone what they preaching and
Well, I don't even remember if I shared this with you, but after selling my company, I was with Gong as an interim general manager.
Oh, really?
For a while. Yeah. So I may have or may have not seen that information. Yeah, well, as long as humans are not going anywhere, I think we're going to have a lot more of that.
And by the way, I think it really, like, some of the best prompting today is like, ask me questions to make sure we build a plan properly. It's part of it. Like, we actually use it with AI as well.
Yeah, well, that's a completely different conversation. And I think AI becoming mainstream is, at least for me, it's such a blessing because my background is more in data science, and these terms are very useful to actually describe daily stuff. Context has much, people now have a much more agreeable definition of context, or if you can throw in a conversation, that's bad use of my tokens, or that's a completely different conversation, but an important one and a very useful one, especially in the tech ecosystem. Dor, thank you so much for coming. Seriously, we've been trying to do this for a while. We might have you again in the future if you'll be up to it.
For sure. And I really enjoyed, and I feel like it's a good closure to our 15-year-old selves, 5,000 miles playing tennis against each other.
It's just a checkpoint. It's
just a checkpoint. Yeah.
Checkpoint. Another ML term. Thank you, and congrats on the new gig.
Thank you so much.